Thanks, Barry. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, the attendees, for the Bruges Group meeting. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's rare that one gets to preach to the converted and to celebrate as opposed to have to answer difficult questions about the philosophical position that I have taken on Brexit, which is really against the grain for most of my colleagues in the finance and investment industry. But I'm super excited to be here to tell you what I think is going to happen. As I said, I'm very grateful to have been invited, especially with such illustrious fellow speakers, Tim and Ewan. That's an advert for the Bruges Group, which wasn't actually part of my talk, but here we go. All right. Tonight I'm very briefly going to talk about how Brexit, from my point of view, and this is good for us, this is not bad news, this is good for us, is effectively a sideshow in the implosion of the Eurozone. I'm not talking about the European Union, I'm talking about the Eurozone. This has always been my argument. My argument was not so much about immigration or sovereignty, which other people no doubt will deal with. My argument, when I first spoke to the Bruges Group, was Europe itself is a sinking boat, and we better get on the lifeboat to avoid being dragged under by the wake of the Euro Titanic. And that's still my argument. And it's more valid today because the problems in Europe are mounting up faster than I can almost recite them. I'm then going to talk about what the shape of a Brexit deal might be and the implications in terms of opportunities for us all as business people, as citizens in the United Kingdom. Now, what the Remainer group reminds me of in many ways is the people in America who congregate every year, go up to the top of the mountain and wait the second coming, basically. You know what I'm talking about. And the second coming hasn't happened yet, and probably won't happen in our lifetimes. But they, these disappointed folk, they get to the top of the mountain and all they say is, well, it's happening, but we just got the timing wrong. And that's really what's happened with the Remain camp. As you remember, before the referendum, we had George Osborne, who I unfortunately had to share a plane with, not just me and him, but a few other people, as he collected another £300,000 for some speech that's not going to tell anyone anything, coming back from New York. It didn't happen. We haven't had a recession. Yet again, the United Kingdom was the fastest growing economy in the G7 last year. And in fact, I can tell you today, they're about to revise up the fourth quarter GDP growth from 0.6% to 0.7%. We have a remarkably strong economy. And this year is looking a lot better than the Ramonas were suggesting just a few months ago. We haven't had a crash in property prices. Sure, we've had an adjustment in sterling, but to my mind, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. We didn't get the promised emergency budget. And as far as I'm aware, no one has gone to Paris, to Frankfurt, to Dublin, Amsterdam, or anywhere else in the European Union in preference to London. And why would you? And that's just not going to happen. So the second coming people have been, rather like in America, proved totally wrong. And we were lucky that we voted the way we did, because Europe is going from one crisis to another, and sooner or later, the big moment, the big tipping point is going to come. And I have said, and I'm not one of these people who 5 or 10 years ago predicted the imminent demise of the euro. I've been saying this for about 18 months now. And in fact, the first time I talked about it publicly was with Barry's group about a year and a bit ago in Manchester. But the Eurozone is an unattainable construct. And you can see now, from every corner of Europe, bad news coming with regard to the sustainability of the euro currency. Now I have to tell you that if there wasn't the Eurozone currency, I would be more or less in favour of a loose association of European nations trading freely with each other with some freedom of movement of labour. That's the way that I would be if it wasn't for the fact that the Eurozone, this artificial construct, this economic bodge chop, probably the worst economic decision in the last 50 years around the globe, was superimposed on divergent cultures, divergent economic tracks, and it's just not worked. And there are many bits of evidence on that, none of which I can really go into any detail tonight. But the reason why I think Brexit, in a way, is a sideshow is because all these Eurozone problems are piling up. And before we leave the European Union, whenever it is, in 2019 or 2020, a major explosion, or implosion, if you want to look at it that way, will have occurred in the European Union. Now, there are unsustainable debt levels in the periphery of Europe. The IMF has come out as an example and said that Greece's debt would be 270% of GDP by the year 2040 if it carries on as it is without debt relief, if it carries on as a member of the European common currency. And that is replicated really around the whole of the peripheral region. Portugal is the next most vulnerable, followed by Italy, and then, believe it or not, France. The banking systems in some countries in the European Union are very vulnerable to distress and have not yet fully recognized the loan losses that they've incurred post-2008, unlike, for instance, the banks here in the United Kingdom, or even now the banks in Spain, or particularly the banks in the United States. Germany is a highly export-dependent country, and for the last few years it's been exporting like bilio, in large part to other European Union countries, and it's built up a huge overdraft facility on their behalf called Target 2. Those debts will never, ever, ever be repaid. It's fiction. They basically sell the BMWs to the Greeks, the Spaniards, the Portuguese. They get an IOU, and that IOU will never be either in full part or in part discharged. And of course, as we all know, we have a replica of some of the political activities that have occurred here in the United Kingdom and in the US coming up in the election cycle this year in France, Holland and Germany. We don't know which way they're going to go. I would very much doubt that Marine Le Pen will win in France, and actually I hope that she doesn't, because she doesn't reflect the civic views that we, the people in this room, have. In Holland, ditto. And in Germany, it looks like Mrs. Merkel's position is a lot more precarious than anyone would have bet as recently as the beginning of this year. So the euro currency is going to implode. Which way is it going to go? I have no idea, which is why I have no idea in which way to invest. Do you invest in the new German Deutschmark, or whatever it's called? Do you short the Italian assets on the basis that the Italian assets will go down when they have to leave the Eurozone? And as you can see, there is a multitude of issues that face the European Union, ranging from the Italian banking crisis, which is still definitely not resolved, to the issue of French national sovereignty, to the Hungarian position on immigration. There is no commonality in this European common area. They're all pursuing their vested interests. They're all blowing their budgets, or they're going over the limits that were imposed, particularly in the case of Germany, which now has a current account surplus of 9% of GDP. And they haven't been sanctioned at all, and they should have been sanctioned under European rules. So they impose these rules, they can't keep to them, and the result is that the tensions, the fractures, the fissures, and the earthquake that's going to come ever closer to fruition. Now, I mentioned earlier the Target 2 balances. That blue line at the top is the German overdraft facility for the rest of Europe. That's the money that flows between these countries, and that debt for Germany will never, ever be repaid. Mark my words, it will never be repaid. And that represents the fault in the European common currency. Germany outproduces, has a higher productivity ratio, keeps its wages and domestic economy low at the expense of all the rest of them. And as a result, you're now beginning to see bond spreads, that's the difference in bond yields between the weak and the strong economies in the Eurozone, begin to move out. But anyone who thinks that the French yield, which is about 0.7% higher than the German yield, is an appropriate level is mad. No one should own French bonds, Portuguese bonds, Spanish bonds, Italian bonds, or the bonds of any of the weak members of the Eurozone. And they're very easy to identify. They're very easy to identify. Just go back and look at that target 2 chart that I mentioned earlier on. Mad to own these bonds. And of course, the euro has brought tremendous poverty to a whole generation of Europeans. As you know, Greece has gone from being a relatively prosperous country to being really a food bank economy. You get the same in Spain, where I live for half the year. 45% of the young people, and by young, that's up to 34 years old, do not have a job, probably will never get a proper job, have no hope. And one of the things that really appalled me during this Brexit campaign was that the way that the Remainers said, we need to do it for young people. We need to stay in the European Union for young people. Why? Look at the young people around Europe and look how they have lost their whole life, really, as a result of the imposition of this stupid currency on top of their economies. And why it is that countries like Greece or Spain or Portugal didn't leave ages ago is absolutely beyond me, other than that they're representatives of feather-bedded in that hive of parasites known as Brussels, from whence I came today. And here we are. Here are the stark figures. People might say, occasionally Jean-Claude Juncker will come out of the bar to say, oh, the economy is doing a little bit better. Or Guy von Hofferstadt, or whatever his name is, will come out and make some pronouncement as well. The economy is doing a bit better, inflation is improving, blah, blah, blah. The facts are, Europe has been in stasis for nearly 10 years. The Italian economy has not grown since 1998. Italian productivity and industrial production is lower than it was in 1994. Is that because the Italians are all stupid, not working? No, it's not. It's because they've had this currency imposed upon them. And in the old days, all they would do is devalue every time that the Germans became more competitive, and they sort of synchronise themselves. They can't do it anymore. And ditto for all the other countries in the peripheral zone. We are so lucky not to have the euro. We are so lucky not to have gone into that stupid currency. So what's going to happen? What is the shape of a Brexit deal? Well, here's the negotiating team on the other side, in the top 2 photographs. Jean-Claude is fortifying himself, as usual. And that's probably a sort of modest visualization. And then that's our team underneath. And I think Mrs. May has done very well so far. She hasn't given away her hand, which is quite correct. She's got some pretty good cards to play, I think, in this negotiation. And she's prepared to walk away and say, well, we'll just trade under WTO rules, if necessary, if we can't get a proper negotiation out of Europe. And I can tell you now that the City of London doesn't need the passporting rights into Europe. It's not necessary. We can trade in the euro with no problem whatsoever here in London, just as we trade in dollars or in the South African rand or whatever else. You don't trade currencies in the location in which they're printed. It's not necessary to do that. So the City of London is not going to be diminished as a result of Brexit, but obviously it's better, particularly for the fund management industry, which does rely on some passporting rules, if we do a deal with Europe. We are all familiar with the fact that it's in their interest to do a deal with us, and my view is that eventually they will do a deal with us. They'll do a deal largely because they want to get this Brexit thing out of the way as all their own problems mount up. Now, bear in mind, I've said the euro is going to implode. Do you think that on the day that Italy leaves, or Portugal leaves, or Spain leaves, there will have been a protracted negotiation about the terms on which they leave the euro? Of course not. The first one to leave has the major advantage. They're not going to tell anyone. And it's possible that Germany might just leave. It's possible. But sooner or later, someone is going to leave. And then the whole house of cards comes tumbling down, and the opportunity for us becomes even greater. I looked into this very carefully, because there was a lot of bullshit talked during the election on both sides of the equation. But the fact is, as far as we can see, about £385 billion has been paid in by the United Kingdom in the years since we joined the European Union. Now, the total gross amount is 500 billion, but we've got rebates thanks to Margaret Thatcher, whose picture is on that wall over there. And we also get some money back from them in the form of the common agricultural policy and in the form of some scientific subventions that are important here in the UK and that come from the European Union. So the net amount is £380 billion. Now, what could that buy you? I asked my colleague, Anthony Chow, to work this one out. We can have 4,750 Cristiano Ronaldos, 17 aircraft carriers, or we could pay for the NHS for 3 years. So all that money is being shoveled over to build roads in Hungary, build roads in Spain, build buildings in Brussels, build vainglorious projects on behalf of other people and not on behalf of the British people. It's a lot of money. And when they come up with this idea that we have a Brexit bill to pay, most of which is fictitious, I say in contrast, well, where's our 11% share of all the buildings in Brussels? Where's our 11% share of all the roads in Hungary and in Spain and all the rest of it? You know, for every asset there's a liability. We want our money back. If you're going to charge us £50 billion, we want our... I don't think we're going to have an associate membership. I don't think we need it. But I do think they'll come to their senses and there will be some sort of deal that's done. I think it's possible, and Mrs. May is very good at this, that we could have a deal done within 2 years, largely, as I said, because the European Union needs to get us out of the way to try and focus on holding on to what they have left. And it's going to be very hard for them as countries fall out of the European common currency construct. So we have all these, you know this, trade deals potentially lined up. Wow, there's 160 other countries out there in the world, apart from the 27 ones that are in the European Union, apart from us. And we can do trade deals with them very quickly. And I think some of these countries are extremely positive about doing trade deals. But with or without trade deals, we are a country that is a mercantilist country with fantastic services in particular, and we're going to do fine with or without specific bilateral trade deals. But I'm pretty sure that we can get a lot of them on the board before this. But now this is an interesting fact. My friend James Ferguson, I'm pro-immigration, okay? I'm not for putting up barriers. But what I'm not pro is people gaming the system who come to this country. And James Ferguson has done some very careful calculations, which are based on these so-called and ludicrous Gordon Brown tax credits, which for some reason persist till today. It's much better for people to work 16 hours a week and then claim these tax credits and renters' allowances and all that sort of stuff than it is to do a proper 4 weeks' work. And about half the people who are claiming tax credits are European Union migrants. And some of that money is going direct to the countries from which they come. In itself, that accounts for between 1/3 and half of our total budget deficit, because our welfare payments are so large in this country. Welfare payments in real terms have grown by 50% since 1999. Right? That's a huge amount of money. So let people in, but do not give them the incentive not to work a full week's work and to game a system for their personal benefit. And that should apply to our domestic population as well. It's not just something about European Union citizens. We are paying people basically to sit at home or to work in the black economy and to suck money out of the UK Treasury. That's got to stop. We've got to get our finances under control. £900 billion more debt since the financial crisis. Our gross national debt has doubled since the financial crisis, and it's nothing to do with the banks, because we've been repaid on the whole of the banking bailout. So Brexit opportunities, pursue bilateral trade deals. We are going to go back to a trade surplus, a current account surplus rather, largely because of the effects of the weaker pound, both on manufacturing, but more importantly on the translation of our very, very large foreign investments, dividend income, and interest payments and other foreign corporate profits that are going to come translate back into more pounds. And of course we'll be free from the burden of what European regulation that we wish to get rid of. And since the Brexit vote, our indices have done extremely well, the economy looks in pretty robust shape, and our GDP per capita, despite the depreciation of sterling, is now the highest amongst all of the major European countries. And I remember as a child that Italy overtook us in something called the sorpasso, and they boasted about the fact that they were richer than the British. Well, look at them today. They have less than 2/3 the income per head of the British, and they've been going down. So we're doing really well, and we can celebrate our national success. And our currency is relatively undervalued, funny enough, against most currencies except for the euro. And that's because people don't know what's going to happen to the euro. The euro is undervalued if you take it in its entirety. The problem is we don't know. Is it going to be a French euro, a German euro? We just don't know who's going to be left in it. It's a very hard one to call. I've got some investment ideas here, because that's what I do. If you want these slides, please ask my colleague Anthony Chow afterwards, and you'll be welcome to get them. But more importantly, and here we are, some British and foreign companies that you might be interested in. We have the Master Investor Show coming up on March the 25th, and I will be talking about the investment opportunities in greater detail. And everyone here is welcome for no cost to come to the Master Investor Show. It's a great show. But in a nutshell, what I want to say is that when we were Brexiteers, we were relatively lonely. The night before Brexit, I think all of us probably in our hearts thought we had lost the vote, didn't we? No. Okay. It looked pretty bleak, let's put it like that. All right. And Stuart, who's a veteran gambling guy, the odds were very bad for us, basically. But we won, and we won by what in election terms is a significant victory. And the Remainers have been trying to thwart that victory, or the progress of that victory, rather like the people going up and down the mountain. But it's not happened. Things are getting better and are good. And we're so lucky to be outside the European Union at this stage that I think we should all raise thanks to those, Barry, Robert, and others who have really committed their lives, and Stuart for that matter, to ensuring that the vote went our way. And I in particular am very, very grateful that we are not in this horrible Euro construct, because I see it every day. It's an absolute disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me.